Yeah, I'm here with Meg Webb, who's an independent MP in the Upper House, not currently up for re-election, but looking at today, we can sort of see some support, particularly going to those independents in Clark. What are your initial thoughts on the results coming in?
Well, I think it's quite fascinating to see a government that, for politically opportunistic reasons, sent us to the polls a year early to try and capitalise on a COVID effect, has actually not been rewarded for that. If we see this government either just hold their ground or maybe even go backwards a little bit, I think that's the Tasmanian people giving them a bit of a slap, quite frankly. We're not seeing a landslide. We're not seeing the kind of inflation of their vote that we might have expected from COVID. So I think that doesn't necessarily bode well for this government, especially if it faces a challenging time in the lower house with some independents into the mix.
So you think the reason to go to an election due to minority was sort of, I guess, a bit of a farce from the outset?
Absolutely spurious. There was no minority really at any stage. Although they disendorsed Sue Hickey, they had Madeleine Ogilvie lined up ready to join the party. They clearly would have known that. So I think it's pretty obvious to anybody observing from the outside that that was really just a made-up reason to take us to an early election, hoping to see the effect we've seen in other jurisdictions, in other states, where there was a bit of a landslide to successful COVID management.
Now, one of the major policy changes we've seen from the last election to this one is particularly around pokies, Labor backflipping on that previous policy to ban them. Do you think they're starting to get a bit punished in the seat of Clark there?
Well, I think certainly the electorate's probably a bit uncertain as to where Labor actually sits now when it comes to poker machines. They did take a very strong position to the last election, not in fact to ban them, but just to restrict them to casinos, and then fairly quickly ditched that position once they lost the election. While they've been talking about harm minimisation as a priority since that time, this campaign actually saw a secret deal emerge, an MOU with the Hospitality Association, which I think also then was a whole nother level of disappointment, not just for the Labor voters out there in the community, but the community in general, to think, well, where do Labor sit on this issue? I don't think it's helped them to be flip-flopping around on it, and I really hope that they can bring some backbone when we do see this legislation come to Parliament, and they do have to actually take a firm position and prove that their values are around the Tasmanian community and delivering good outcomes and harm minimisation. We want to see that actually play out when it comes through Parliament.
To be fair, though, the Liberals also have, agreements like this when it comes to particular industries, and also looking ahead at those casinos, particularly with the tax rates and stuff. Should the Liberals have revealed that prior to coming to the polls?
The Liberals like to say that their policy was done and dusted at the last election. If that was the case, we should have seen months ago, in fact probably a couple of years ago, what their arrangement was with Federal Group when it comes to tax rates on poker machines in casinos. There is no way the Premier doesn't know what that rate is. If he doesn't know, then he doesn't actually have a policy that's fixed and firm and agreed. If he does know, then he's kept it from the Tasmanian people ahead of this election, presumably for political advantage and electoral advantage. Unacceptable. The Tasmanian people should not be kept in the dark on such a key feature of the Liberal policy. So I think the Tasmanian people deserve to actually have both major parties be entirely upfront with the arrangements they have with this industry, well before we have this policy and legislation come through Parliament.
Just finally, either side have said that they don't want to ruin minority. If they choose to go down that and actually follow that idea of not, going with the will of the people, is that sort of, I guess, really turning their back on them?
I think it's worse than turning their back. I think it's actually childish. It's a tantrum approach to democracy and to an election result. It's the Tasmanian people and their votes that decide who sits in Parliament, and we make a government from that. And for either major party, in fact in this case both major parties, to say that they're going to stamp their foot and stomp out the door and refuse to govern in minority is absolutely a slap in the face to the Tasmanian people. That's not how democracy works. Certainly not how democracy works in many, many places around the world and in other parts of Australia. We've seen minority governments work really well in many places. We could see it work well here. I think it's a minority government has to work hard, has to negotiate, has to be accountable. Now, if both major parties aren't up for that, neither of them deserve to be in government.
Meg Webb, some very strong thoughts there. Thank you very much. Back to you, Karen.